Now once you've opened 3ds Max for the very first time, you're going to get a welcome screen here that is a really good launch pad for a basic introduction to the software. What you have here is you have some essential skill movies that can show you some very basic introductory tutorials on how to get started using the program, as well as some additional resources down here, as in what's new in 3ds Max 2012, the 3ds Max YouTube channel, and more resources here on the web at the Autodesk website. On the top right here, you see Start Using 3ds Max by creating a new empty scene. You can open an existing file, and if you have recent files that you've previously been working on, they would be listed here. But since this is our first time, obviously, this box will be empty. Now down here at the bottom left, we could say Show this welcome screen at startup. We'll go ahead and leave that on, just in case we want to use it a little bit later and come back to this launch screen. Now if you do left click on any one of these skill training videos, this will open up the video in your web browser. As you can also see, they're listed here. And down here along the bottom, you'll see the play button where you can actually get started watching the videos. Go ahead and left click on the play button to get started. Once you're done with that video, you can go ahead and close it out. And you can either navigate inside there to some of the other videos, or you can always come back to this launch screen whenever you open 3ds Max. So for now, let's go ahead and left click on Close, and that'll close that window. So once you've opened the program for the very first time, it can be somewhat confusing. You're looking at a lot of stuff here on screen with a lot of information that may be a little overwhelming at first, but once you have a basic understanding of all these buttons and functions, you'll easily be able to find the tools that you do need and possibly hide some of the ones that you may not need. For example, this area may be used for your 3D modeling and some of the tools over here along the right. You may or may not have much need for animation at this point, in which case it can be a little less intimidating when you realize what parts of the UI you're really going to utilize for your everyday needs. And so to get started here in the user interface, let's take a look at all the different aspects of the UI and all the different pieces of it that we're looking at. Now here along the top left-hand side, starting at the big giant 3ds Max icon in the upper left, if we left click on this, you'll see that we have a lot of options here to create a new scene, reset 3ds Max, open existing files, etc. All the way down to properties where you can set specific properties with this scene, and a lot of other menus that we'll talk about throughout this course. Now here just to the left of that, we can create a new scene, open scene, save file, some of the similar buttons and tools that you just saw in this pull-down menu, as well as the undo button and the redo button. Let's say you're doing something here in your scene, you made a little bit of a mistake or something, you can undo that operation. Or if you did something that you actually liked, you can redo it by either clicking on this button or using the hotkeys. And we'll talk a lot more about hotkeys throughout this course as well. Now just underneath of that, we have our edit button, tools, group, and a whole lot of other icons here inside of the menu bar. Many of these we will use, and there's many of these that we will not throughout the course of this in the game asset modeling class, such as animation. We won't get into too much of that. We won't really utilize the graph editors, as well as several of these other ones. Now just about everything that you could want to possibly do here in 3ds Max can be accessed via this pull-down menu, as well as over here on the right under the command panel, which we will be talking about in just a second. Now just under the menu bar you have your toolbar, and this is where yet another large group of functions and tools are, which you can imagine are more or less tools that you can utilize with just about everything you can think of. Things like your move tool, your select tool, rotate, scale. Let's say you create a box. These are the types of tools that you'll utilize to select the box, move the box, things like how to go about selecting and where you want the pivot point to be, some grids and snap tools that we'll be talking about. You can create selection sets, which are groups of objects that you can easily organize. We have our mirror tool, our align tool, layer manager, where you can store all your different assets into individual layers, as well as some of our rendering and animation tools here along the right-hand side. Now, this large gridded area that you see here in the center of the screen, this is your primary viewports. Now, by default, you're able to view your 3D objects in several different views, several different orthographic views, which basically means a perfect front, top, left, right, bottom, etc. Whereas down here on the right-hand side, this is a perspective view, which if you can imagine is a sort of a more realistic three-quarter view, but it's not exactly as precise as your orthographic views. Now you can customize these in a lot of ways as well, which we'll talk about, and you aren't bound by just these small boxes. One thing that you can do is if you hover your mouse right around in the center of them, you can quickly sort of drag this up and down to the position and size that you want it to be in. Let's say you want to focus more on the top, but still keep all four of these windows. You can click this and sort of pull this down and find a size that suits you for the specifics of the scene that you're working in. Now let's say that perhaps you don't want to work with all four viewports and you want to focus just on the perspective view. Down here in the very bottom right-hand corner, we have the Maximize Viewport toggle, and if we go ahead and left-click on that, you'll see that this brings up the entire perspective view here in the center of your screen. And if you left-click on that again, this will bring you back to where you were just before with the top view, left view, and the other viewports that you had. And so if you want to focus just on one and toggle back and forth really quickly without having to use that toggle, up here in the top left-hand corner where you see the word perspective, if you left-click on that, you'll notice that we have all the different viewports available here, as well as a corresponding hotkey here to the right. For example, P for perspective, T for top, L for left, etc. And so while we are here inside this viewport, if we go ahead and hit the L key, you'll notice that we've now switched to the left view. If we hit P, we're now in perspective, T for top, etc., etc. And so if we switch back to perspective view, you'll notice that it's kind of inheriting some of our parameters when we switch from top to perspective. But if we want to go ahead and navigate around here in 3D space, if we hold down the Alt key and our middle mouse button, we can sort of rotate the camera around here in 3D space. And if we had some objects in here, we'd be able to navigate around them easily as well. Now to completely frame this scene, whether there's something in it or let's say we had a teapot in here, if we hit the Z key to zoom in on it, that will allow us to zoom in on that specific object. And if there's nothing in here, when we hit the Z key, this basically recenters the entire scene on the grid in this empty blank space. Now, while we are looking at this empty scene, we also notice up here in the top right-hand corner, this is what is called our view cube. We can also left-click on it in all of these different angles. There are little arrows here along that we can left-click on, and this allows us to also quickly and easily switch back and forth between our different views. And so, for example, if we want the left view or we want to switch to a top view, we can also use these little small spinners here to rotate the camera around our object or our scene. And if we want to switch back, we can always just hold down the left mouse button and click and drag, and this will allow us to kind of steer with that view cube. Now, if you want to increase some parameters of the view cube, you can right-click on this little home icon here, and we can go ahead and click on Configure. And over here, you can see that we have the view cube size. If we wanted to make it bigger, we can go ahead and hit Apply. And now you'll notice we have this really big, giant view cube that will allow us to switch back and forth between our different views. We could set it to small, normal, tiny, as well as a few other parameters that you're welcome to go ahead and play around with. If you decide that you don't want to use the view cube, you can also turn it off completely by left-clicking on Show the View Cube. We'll go ahead and turn it off for now, just so we can get used to using hotkeys and our other methods for switching back and forth between our different views. We'll go ahead and hit Apply, and OK. And so, once again, now that we're in the perspective view, we can hold down the Alt key and our middle mouse button to simply sort of reframe our scene, or just press the Z key to zoom in on the blank scene. Now, if you do decide that you do like the view cube, you can always find it again by clicking on Views, View Cube, Show the View Cube, or the hotkey of Alt-Control-V. So get in the habit of switching back and forth quickly and easy by using those hotkeys, whether it's P for perspective, T for top, F for front, B for bottom, L for left, perspective, Z. it's a good habit to get into to always utilize the Z key in conjunction with your viewport that you select. And so, for example, if we made a cylinder and we go to the top view and press Z, we immediately snap to that cylinder. Perspective view, Z to frame it, and then kind of position the camera the way that we want by holding down the middle mouse button by itself. This will switch to the pan camera icon. You can see the little hand there in the center of the screen. If you just hold down that middle mouse button, this will allow you to kind of pan the camera left and right, and then hit the Z key once again to frame the object that you have. Now if you scroll your mouse button, your middle mouse button, in and out, you'll notice that you are zooming in and out of the scene or the object that you have selected. And so if you zoom way out and press that Z key again, this will immediately snap the view right back to the object that you have selected. And so if we go ahead and zoom back, let's make a teapot and a sphere. Now by left-clicking on an object that you create and pressing the Z key, you'll focus just on that object that you have. And if you select multiple objects and press Z, you'll frame those two objects that you have. And with nothing selected, once again, this frames the entire scene. Whether you're in the top view, the left view, or any of the views that you have, by quickly selecting the view and pressing Z to frame in on it, holding down the middle mouse button to truck the camera, and then rolling the middle mouse button back and forth to zoom in and out. Now that we've looked at the basics of navigating around the scene, let's go ahead and reset this scene entirely by clicking on the big 3ds Max icon here in the upper left. We'll go ahead and left click on Reset. And when this dialog box pops up, it's going to ask you and warn you that the scene has been modified. Do you want to save your changes? For now, we'll go ahead and hit No. It will ask you again, do you really want to reset? We'll left click Yes. And this will reset 3ds Max back to its default position with the view